conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, Mayur.
Yeah, good evening everyone. Myself CA Mayur Jain, Secretary of Kalyan Dombivli branch. Welcome you all. Today, this is our fourth session on direct tax series, and the topic for today is one of my favorites: is representation before appellate authorities under Income Tax Act. Then speaker will be Abhishek Ji, Advocate Abhishek Tilak. He is a senior associate at Advaita Legal. I thank Vyomesh Bhai for arranging this session, and I thank Abhishek Ji for taking the session on today's topic. Now I hand over the charge to Ankit to say some few words, our chairman of the branch.
Yes, thank you, Mayur. Good afternoon to all of you. Friends, I welcome you on behalf of Kalyan Dombivli branch. Today, we are having the session by Abhishek Tilakji. I would like to mention that he is a LLM from London. So now, in further, the speakers we are having from all over the country. We are having international speakers from Austria for the international tech series and many more. Friends, I would like to draw your attention towards the webinars that we are keeping. Tomorrow again we are having a webinar on international taxation. Day after tomorrow we are having a special session for the women, that how can they be successful in professional life after they are married. So we are having an expert speaker from Pune, Shreya Shah. I would request all the movement members to please join it. Also on the 4th, we have a great session on the share markets. Today we are free during the lockdown, so we track the markets. And for the beginners, for the investor, for the traders, it's a great opportunity to learn new things. So I will request all of you to please join for that webinar. You can also circulate among our other CA members. Today we have received the guidelines. First, it was that our webinar is restricted only to our branch members, but now it can be viewed by all the chartered accountants. So our branch secretary Mayur Bhai had mailed to the CP regarding our grievance that our webinars should be viewed to all the members of our fraternity, and that has been accepted. Thank you, Mayur, for your efforts. Now I hand over the charge to Abhishek Bhai. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Mr. Agarwal, Chairman of the branch, Mr. Jain, Secretary of the branch, and moderator of the session, Mr. Pathak, members of the Kalyan Dombivli branch of WRC, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, a very good evening to everyone. I hope and pray that everyone is staying safe and healthy and are staying at home during this particular trying times. At the outset, I would like to thank the entire team at Kalyan Dombivli branch of WRC for organizing and these webinars, and more particularly to Mr. Vyomesh Pathak for inviting me to interact and share my views on today's topic, representation before appellate authorities under the Income Tax Act. As we are under the lockdown, there is no better time to keep on learning, and I thought that this particular topic might be relevant for our current discussion. Before proceeding further, little announcement. The topic will be covered from a practical and procedural aspect, as dealing with technical or theoretical subjects as deliberately been kept away, because this is from a practitioner's point of view. So, shall we begin? So I've considered. Is my screen visible?
No. Yes, it is.
No.
Somebody? Yeah. All right. So representation before appellate authorities. At this point of time, we are going to assume that the AO has passed an adverse order against the SSE, and the SSE has made up his mind to file an appeal before the appellate authorities. The first being the Commissioner Appeals. I have listed out what we are going to cover in this particular topic, that is Commissioner Appeals, representation before dispute resolution panel. Although it's not an appellate authority, it's a continuation of assessment proceedings. It is very important to touch upon DRP, because the appeal after the final order directly lies with the ITA team. Thereafter, we'll be covering representation before the Honorable ITAT. Thereafter, representation before the Honorable High Court and the Supreme Court. Before diving into the details about representation before the CIT appeals, Section 288 is a must to be looked into. It enumerates what is authorized representative. An authorized representative of an assessee.
Hello.
Sorry. Yes, an authorized representative. My slides are. You want me to show my slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
You are
the slides coming clearly? Because
Your slides
I
are
can see
visible,
your-
Abhishek. Yeah, there is no issue.
Yes.
Please continue.
Okay. Yes. So Section 288 enumerates who can represent an assessee before the authorized representative, before the income tax authorities, especially appellate authorities, till the tribunal level. In case a CA or a tax practitioner, a power of attorney has to be executed on a stamp paper. In case authorized representative is an advocate, a wakalatnama has to be executed by affixing a court stamp of 10 rupees. Such authorization must be given by a person who's signing the form 35 and as per section 140, that is MD of a company or partner of a firm or something. It is essential to bear in mind that such authorization should bear a seal of a company and a full signature of the authorized signatory. Right. Representation before Commissioner Appeals is the first appellate authority under the Act. An assessee can file an appeal before the Commissioner Appeals if against an unfavorable order of AO. It is a statutory appeal enumerated under Section 236 of the Act. Only assessee can file an appeal against the AO order. The time limit for filing an appeal is within 30 days from the receipt of the order and demand notice, particularly the demand notice. Belated appeal can be entertained by CIT appeals subject to condonation of delay. Such delay has to be justified by a sufficient cause, stating that there was unintentional delay on the part of the assessee to not file the appeal within limitation. A separate application has to be filed for condonation of delay, along with an affidavit sworn with reasons by the deponent setting out in the affidavit. Such affidavit has to be executed on a stamp paper, and it is advisable that such affidavit is notarized by the notary also. Appeal may be filed before the CIT appeals in Form 35. Whoever is the assessee, if files by way of an e-filing the return of income, then it is mandatory to be filed by way of an e-filing. Signing off a form of an appeal. Form of an appeal should contain grounds of appeal, statement of facts, and it should be verified by the person who signs the return of income on behalf of the assessee. Documents to be submitted are statement of facts and grounds of appeal. Pre-deposit of tax is necessary, however, it may or may be condoned by the CIT appeal by a separate way of an application. Requisite fees are to be paid for instituting the appeal. All right, let's talk about statement of facts. Very important. The statement of facts should be a narration of facts which led up to the addition or a disallowance of a particular issue by the assessing officer. A background of the assessee is very important by setting out of the transaction in the particular statement of facts. It is not advisable at all to set out case laws in a statement of facts. I have seen many times in statement of facts, case laws and arguments have been laid. From a practitioner point of view, it is advisable to avoid that. Such things can be dealt in by way of a separate written submission to which will come later. Ratios may be put in the facts. However, ratios may be put in the statement of facts. However, it is also not advisable to do so. Statement of facts should not be argumentatively styled. It should be simple form. Save the argumentative style of drafting for written submissions. Grounds of appeal.
So just
Very crucial.
to add here, Abhishek,
Yes.
on statement of facts.
Yes.
What I have generally seen in the appeals which are filed by the practicing chartered accountants, the few common mistakes that I see is people often, misjudge between the statement of facts and grounds of appeal, and it is a single
Correct.
document covering everything together. So let me
Correct.
clarify one thing, that statement of facts is altogether a different document, and grounds of appeal are the grounds of or grounds against which you are challenging the assessment order. So statement of facts is nothing but what are your facts. Simple, you can begin from the date of filing of return, that the assessee filed the return of income on so and so. Then the matter was picked up for assessment on so and so. Notice was issued by the assessing officer. So cause notice was issued. Various submissions were made. You mentioned the date of the submissions. You may summarize your submissions, whatever you have made before the assessing officer. And to conclude, you can conclude with what is the addition or the disallowance which is made by the assessing officer. That's it. Nothing more than this. You should not quote any case laws in the statement of facts. You should not have any arguments in the statement of facts. As the name suggests, it is just a statement of fact, and only the facts should be contained in this particular document. Then the grounds of appeal is a separate document, with Abhishek will cover in the subsequent slide. I'll add on if required on this slide, but that was my input on the statement of facts and the common mistakes that is being made. See, the purpose of today's session, just to reiterate, is that we are not going into the law. We are not going into the sections and all. We are going to talk about the practical aspects of appeal filing and practical aspects of representations before the appellate authorities, which to my mind is a niche practice. Time and again I have been receiving calls previous practitioners, be it new practitioners, new chartered accountants, or even those who have been in practice since long, that we are very much irritated with the routine practice. What is it that new we can do? So this is the area which I believe, if you are practicing in taxation and more so income tax, then appellate practice is something which is a niche practice. There are very few chartered accountants who are practicing even before CIT appeal, forget ITAT. So therefore, I say that the market is very much untapped as far as practicing chartered accountants is concerned. And with that background in mind, we thought that we should have this session to share practical insights on how do we actually deal about the CIT appeal, ITAT, and High Court, as the case may be. And that is why we had invited Advocate Abhishek Tilak, who is my good friend as well, and he is practicing purely into litigation. So therefore, we thought that he is the right person to do justice to this topic. And with this backdrop, we have created this particular, or we have organized this particular program and this session. And this is more, as I said, more about the practical nuances of representation and practical nuances, or rather do's and don'ts, in terms of what should you do and what you should not do, filing as well as actual representation before authorities. Yeah, Abhishek.
Right. Thank you, Umesh, for saving my time on touching upon that aspect. I was really going to cover that after enunciating my views on grounds of appeal. As Vyomesh has rightly said, a lot of times what happens is that there is a jumbling up of statement of facts and grounds of appeal. Everything isn't together. Recently, I was appearing before a CIT appeals where a particular client was handled by somebody in Chennai. And that gentleman had actually not filed grounds of appeal per se. There were statement of facts and there were argumentative style grounds of appeals. The CIT appeal in the first hearing asked me, where are your grounds? Therefore, I had to take an adjournment and then come back with a proper form of Form 35, annexed with a proper document containing grounds of appeal and separate document containing statement of facts. So thank you, Vamesh, for touching upon that, although I was going to cover that after this particular slide. Anyway, coming upon grounds of appeal, very crucial. As Vamesh suggested, and rightly so, the grounds should be really addressing to the disallowance or an addition made by the assessing officer and nothing else. It should be precise and not lengthy. It should address the issue directly to the point. Most important, it should not be a repetition of statement of facts. There may be a distinction between general grounds, that is grounds challenging the overall addition or disallowance made by the assessing officer in its order. Specific grounds, that is issue-wise ground. If there are more issues wherein the assessing officer has made addition or disallowance, then a separate issue-wise ground is a must. A separate issue-wise ground is needed to be taken up and drafted accordingly. Additional grounds, will come to additional grounds in a bit, but I have made a point here. A separate application for an additional ground is to be filed with the CIT appeals. Now, it has to be supported with an affidavit sworn by the person deponing the reasons, and it has to also be executed on a stamp paper of 500 rupees, and it is advisable to for it to be notarized by a notary of India. Right. The discretionary power lies with the commissioner to admit such additional grounds. But again, we will come back to additional grounds in a different slide. Once our Form 35 is filed, our appeal has been instituted, the stage comes where a notice has been issued by the Commissioner of Appeals for a hearing. The next stage is filing of paper book and drafting of submissions. Filing of paper book before the Commissioner of Appeals is probably the single most crucial fact of importance, because whatever you file before the Commissioner of Appeal becomes the basis for a paper book before the ITAT, and eventually the High Court and the Supreme Court. Therefore, leading and collation and filing of documents to substantiate assessee's claim is very vital. Filing of return of income, computation, all the letters and correspondences made to the assessing officer in response to the notices issued by the assessing officer is a must. However, it is advisable not to file any tricky or unwanted documents, which in turn might come to haunt you and damage the chances of your success before the first appellate authority. As we know, law of evidence is really not applicable in its truest form, although it is seen that Commissioner Appeals during the hearing become agitated when the proper pagination is not done or certification is not done. Therefore, proper pagination and certification of index as well as the entire paper is a must. Vyomesh, do you want to add something on this?
The paper. Just a second. Yeah. Let me mute. Somebody is talking in between. Yeah. So just couple of points here to be added is firstly in terms of grounds of appeal. I would like to add one particular aspect, that keep your grounds as open and as wide as possible. Don't have restrictive grounds, because you never know practically when your matter will come up for hearing. It may come up after 6 months, it may come up after 1 year. So you should not restrict your grounds. For example, if your ground is say in relation to a particular disallowance, then keep your ground as wide as a simple thing that the learned AO has erred in disallowing a particular expense amounting to so and so. That's it. You may not go deep into the you may have sub grounds which may be specific. You may have sub grounds which may be specific in terms of he has not relied on the submissions, etc. But that is okay. But what I would suggest is you should not restrict your grounds, because the order which is going to be passed against your appeal is particularly against your grounds of appeal. So if you have restrictive grounds of appeal, the order also will be restrictive in that manner, and you never know what development will happen going forward. There may be a positive judgment in your favor, having similar facts, etc., which might support you. So therefore, don't have any restrictive grounds. Keep it as wide open as possible, so that it will be helpful for you to argue in whatever manner possible at the time of hearing, so that you can take a call on what arguments to take and what not arguments to take during the course of hearing. That was on grounds of appeal. I think additional grounds, Abhishek will
Yogesh, I would
cover.
like to add one point.
Yes, yes,
I would like to add one point what Yogesh is saying. Yes, you should really keep your grounds open-ended. However, at the time of the hearing, it is often stated by the Commission of Appeals saying that your grounds are too wide. Therefore, then maybe you may file a concise grounds of appeal addressing to a issue at hand. However, while filing the grounds of appeal, as Yogesh has rightly said, keep your grounds as wide as possible, so that there might be a possibility, if at all, to cover your case from a particular angle, that may be kept in open. Yes, Yogesh.
Yeah. And additional ground you are going to cover separately, right?
Yes, I've got.
Yeah. So coming on to the paper book, it is nothing but summary of whatever submissions you have made before the tax authority or before the assessing officer in relation to your ground. So there may be certain generic documents like return of income computation, financial statements, etc. And there may be some specific submissions also which you have made to justify your claim before the assessing officer, which may or may not have been considered by the assessing officer while adjudicating on that particular matter. So this paper book will support your claims before the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals. And one important aspect here is that it should be these submissions should already be there in the file of the assessing officer. If you are making any additional submissions which is not there on the file of the assessing officer, it may result into additional evidence, which I am sure Abhishek will cover separately.
Yes.
So yeah. So therefore, one thing that is to be mindful, you need to be mindful, is that whatever submissions, relevant submissions you have made before the assessing officer, you should submit it by way of a paper book. And again, whatever is not relevant, any excess document or those documents which have no correlation with the grounds on appeal should not be submitted unnecessary. You should not make the paper book bulky. Keep it concise, but at the same time include all the relevant documents pertaining to that particular ground. Yeah, Abhishek.
Yes. Strangely, what happens is that the client comes and dumps all the documents, notices leading up to the assessment order. It is our duty to actually segregate and file those documents which pertain to the issue at hand. As Vyomesh said, we should not really bulk up the paper book. The endeavor of filing the paper book is really to succeed before the Commission of Appeals and not really keep our matters in abeyance for years. Having said that, let's move on to written submissions. Right. Now we assume that paper book is already on record, and written submission we have to file. Written submission is the most vital document, and it forms the main document of contentions and arguments. It should contain narration of facts with appropriate reference to paperwork and page numbers. Where there are several issues, set out the facts and arguments with case laws on each issue separately in a formal manner. Case laws should be relied upon in order to fortify your contentions. As India has the common law jurisprudence in place, it is advisable to cite at first the decisions of the jurisdictional ITAT bench and the High Court, and thereafter citing of non-jurisdictional ITAT and High Courts. Please do not file any judgments in the factual paper book. Factual paper book and legal paper book needs to be kept completely different from each other. Factual paper book should only contain the details of factual submissions. Legal paper book should only contain case laws, which you are going to tend during the hearing. Yes, as additional evidence, as Vyomesh was touching upon, any document for one reason or the other, which was not filed before the assessing officer, that document which you want to file before the commissioner appeal will become an additional evidence. Therefore, Rule 46 comes into play, and we have to adhere to that particular rule. Application for admission of additional evidence has to be filed separately. There is no gain saying that an affidavit in support of such application has to be again filed, sworn by the person who deposed it, with reasons stating out as to what prevented the assessee from not filing the relevant document which the assessee is now seeking to file for the first time before the Commissioner of Appeals. A separate paper book for additional evidence is advisable. After filing additional evidence, as a matter of fact, the CIT may or may not call for a remand report from the assessing officer. Once the remand report comes, Commissioner of Appeals gives you an opportunity to reply to a remand report. A point-wise reply in response to the remand report is advisable to be filed before the Commissioner of Appeals. Right. Coming to the hearing before the Commissioner of Appeals. When a hearing is slated on a particular day and a turn is called in, the practitioner should narrate the facts on issue. Arguments must be kept simple and to the point. CIT appeals should be taken through the factual paper book. While making arguments, reliance should be placed on the case laws to fortify your arguments. Either you may tend case laws by way of an handout, or you may collate a legal paper book as mentioned in the erstwhile slide. Vyomesh, would you like to add anything on this?
Yeah, a couple of points in terms of written submission and representation. Now, you should be mindful while preparing a written submission also. So as a strategy, see, appellate proceedings is more about strategizing and how do you represent your case before the CIT appeal. So at times it might be possible that you are not aware about how the CIT appeal is, what is his mindset, etc. There might be few commissioners who might be, prejudiced to the revenue. There might be few commissioners who are strict. There might be few commissioners who are more concerned about the facts and they don't look at the case laws, etc. So as a strategy, what I suggest before actually filing a written submission is that you have a meeting or a personal hearing before the CIT appeal. You carry a ground chart, which is a summary of grounds, which contains in summary, in a nutshell, what is the facts of the case, what is the AO's contention, and what are your contentions. In very brief, a precise summary chart form, you take that before the CIT appeal. You discuss the grounds at brief. Just take a sense. How does he react? He or she reacts. As in, what additional questions does he ask? What additional document does he ask? So that you can capture all his reservations, or you can capture all his points or all his arguments by way of a written submission in detail. You never know, once you file a written submission, he may or may not give you additional opportunity of being heard. So therefore, I always suggest that is what I follow practically. Now everybody will have their own I would say, practice or their own style of representation. But this is what I practically follow every time whenever I appear before CIT appeal. I first get a sense about what do you I first try to get a sense about the CIT appeal. What does he think about? What is his thoughts, etc. And then I capture all his reservations along with my submission in the written submission, assuming that he is not going to give me further opportunity. So have one complete set of written submission and avoid having piecemeal submissions uh, as far as practicable, and try to cover all the judicial precedents, specifically those judgments which are jurisdictional, Mumbai Tribunal, Bombay High Court, or whichever jurisdiction you are from, you are representing before the CIT appeal, and highlight the jurisdictional judgments in terms of which are in your favor, so that the CIT appeal is practically or technically bound to follow the courts above him. So that is the approach that I would suggest. And in terms of remand report, for those who are not aware what remand report is, whenever you are filing any additional evidence, remand report is nothing but an opportunity being given to the assessing officer, because these documents were not available before him while making the order. So it is giving an opportunity to the assessing officer that these are the additional documents which are submitted by the assessee. Do you have anything to submit in respect of these additional evidence? Do you have any rebuttal? So the assessing officer will generally file a remand report rebutting your additional evidence that these are not relevant, whatever, etc.
And these
After that,
are not supposed to be admitted also.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So effectively, then you will be given an opportunity to rebut to the remand report that this is what the assessing officer has to say. So towards that remand report, you can file a reply, cross reply that I have reservations regarding the observations of the AO, etc. And then the matter can be taken forward. Yeah, Abhishek.
Right. So that was that as far as the Commissioner Appeals is concerned. Representation before dispute resolution panel. It's a 3-commissioner panel, generally with regard to international taxation and transfer pricing. Now, an eligible assessee, as far as section 144C of the Act is concerned, may choose to file its objections before the DRP against the draft order passed by the assessing officer. The form to be filed is Form 35 within 30 days from the date of receipt of the draft order. It is very interesting to note that there is no power vested with the DRP to condone any delay whatsoever. So therefore, meeting this deadline becomes very crucial. Form of appeal, rather objections, should be with annexures, copy of draft order, copy of the transfer pricing order, if any, if the transfer pricing issues are dealt by the transfer pricing officer in its order. Detailed submission in paper book form. Now, I have set out what really needs to be submitted in this particular submission. So a point-wise submission of paper book form may be in detail setting out a background of assessee, facts as submitted to the TPO and AO, facts if modified by the AO or TPO, issue-wise grounds expressing disagreement with the modifications made by the AO or TPO, legal and factual arguments submitted to the AO TPO, factual and legal arguments relied by the TPO AO, additional case laws if any, and prayers. A submission before the DRP is a separate document, should not be filed with this particular Form 35. Yes, as I was saying, a separate submission may be filed to support your contentions with filing a separate legal paperbook containing case laws. A practical note here, it is only advisable to argue on facts before the DRP, because if you argue on law before the 3 commissioners, they will really hamper the chances, if at all, if you pursue the appeal before the ITAT, by distinguishing all the cases which you file before the DRP. Therefore, it is advisable only to argue on facts and keep arguments on case laws or citing of the case laws bare minimum. One may cite ratios or propositions without actually citing the case laws by way of an averment in your written submission or by way of an argument while arguing your matter before these commissioners. Again, admission of additional evidence also may be filed, and the same conditions have to be fulfilled as far as affidavit is concerned. Additional ground and admission accepting such additional ground may also be filed, but it's not advisable at the time of the hearing of the matter before the DRP, because generally, out of my practical experience, it happens so that the DRP members reprimand the counsel who is representing the SSC for his conduct, that if at all a ground was to be taken, the ground would have been taken in Form 35A and not by way of an additional ground before the DRP. With this, Vyomesh, would you like to add up?
Yeah, so just to give you a background of what DRP is about briefly in a couple of minutes. So when there are any international tax adjustments or any TP adjustments, the assessing officer by section 144C has to pass a draft order before actually passing a final order, and the assessee is given an opportunity to file an objection before the DRP by virtue of Form 35A, as Abhishek just discussed. And this is the specific format. If you see Form 35, yes, there is a format, but in terms of statement of facts and grounds of appeal, there is no format. But as far as 35A, there is this specific format of 8 points, that is A to H, which you need to cover in your particular application. And your matter will come up for hearing within 6 months before DRP. Generally, the DRP has to dispose of the matter within a period of 6 months. The positive side of DRP is that if there is a huge demand, you are not required to pay the demand till the time the final order is passed after considering the DRP order. And the negative side or the flip side of DRP is generally, I won't say in all cases, but generally we have observed that DRP orders come negative, that is against the SSC. Generally, it may not be so in all cases, but this is a general observation. And it has an added advantage also, that you go up to the tribunal on a fast track basis. The reason being, your order will be passed within a period of 6 months, and ultimately you can go directly to the tribunal. Otherwise, if you follow the CIT appeal route, the flip side of it is that you need to pay at least 20% of the demand and ask for stay for the balance 80%. And secondly, CIT appeal may take 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years, 3 years, you never know how long. As such, there is no time limit for passing a CIT appeal order. And when you actually go to the tribunal, it might be 4 years, 5 years down the line. So when your matter comes before the tribunal, it will be 4 or 5 years or even more for that matter. So if you want a quick justice, I would say DRP is the fastest route to conclude before the ITAT also. So that is why DRP is, it is not that we suggest DRP to all the cases wherever applicable. We need to look at all the cases, what is the demand involved, what is the strength of the case, facts, etc. And whenever you appear, be it before DRP or be it before CIT appeal or ITAT, whenever you appear, the first thing is you should start with your facts. You should not directly, as Abhishek just said, just adding on to that don't directly start with the case laws or judicial precedents. The case laws or judicial precedents should come at the end. First of all, make your facts clear. Only then come to the judicial precedents or the case laws to be relied upon. Yes, Abhishek.
Yes. To add to what Vyomesh said, yes. And that is the reason I said that reliance on case laws should be restricted to bare minimum, because more often than not, it is seen by us practitioners that the DRP orders come in the favor of the revenue. When a DRP order is in the favor of revenue, our endeavor should be that the DRP the DRP does not get any chance to distinguish the case laws, which would in turn be in your support, which would in turn, if at all relied before the ITAT, the ITAT is likely to render the decision in favor of the SSE. So please do not lead such case laws before the DRP. Keep it minimum to the facts. Lead your facts, lead the propositions, and that should be done. Wait for the order. If at all the order is against the SSE, you can directly challenge that order before the tribunal. Only after finalizing the final order. There is generally no variation in the final order except for some corporate tax, maybe disallowance or addition. But after the final order, an appeal against such final order may be filed before the ITAT. Right. Moving on to Honorable ITAT. It's the second appellate authority under the Act. An SSE, if aggrieved by an order of the CIT appeals, may file a second appeal before the ITAT. Section 254(1) enumerates and elucidates the orders against which an appeal can be filed before the ITAT. Before the CIT appeals, only SSE could file an appeal. However, before the ITAT, both the parties, that is the revenue as well as the SSE, as a matter of right, can file an appeal against an order of the CIT appeals. Time limit enshrined is about 60 days from the date of receipt or service of the order of the CIT appeals. Of course, for belated appeal and condonation application may be filed, setting out reasons for a sufficient cause, which thereby addressing the delays which were cropped up in filing the appeal on time. An affidavit has to be annexed with regard to this application, sworn by a person who sets out such reasons. Affidavit needs to be executed on 500 rupees stamp and thereafter advised to be notarized by the Government of India. Generally, what we have seen is that the ITAT benches take a sort of a lenient view if the delay is up to 365 days, and such delays are condoned, of course, subject to the facts and circumstances of the matter. I happen to be a party to this particular case law which I have mentioned here. I was appearing with the then senior Mr. Vipul Joshi in the case of Vijay Meghani versus DCIT. It is reported in this ITD 153 ITD 687 Mumbai. The facts of this matter are very interesting. The assessment year involved was 94, 95, 95, 96. The issue was with regard to deduction under 80P, the then 80P section which were prevalent in the Act. The delay in filing the appeal before the ITT was about 2,984 days. That's about 8 years. When the matter reached for the hearing got concluded and the order was pronounced. The ITT did not condone any delay. However, passed certain remarks against ICAI and CA profession because there was a particular affidavit which was given by concerned CA stating that the CA had given a wrong advice not to pursue a particular matter before the ITAT and wait for a subsequent year CIT appeals rather than pursuing the earlier year's appeal before the ITAT. The ITAT, while passing the order, reprimanded such practice and made certain remarks against the profession. Just for the sake of completeness and academic purpose, ICAI filed a miscellaneous application against this particular order, wherein Mr. Sonde had appeared for expunging those remarks made against ICAI and CA profession in particular. And thereafter, this matter was taken before the High Court, and the High Court, by imposing cost of 50,000 rupees per appeal, condoned the delay and remanded the matter back to the ITAT. Therefore, such condonation, if at all happens, the power is also with the ITAT as well as the High Court to levy costs and thereafter condone such delays. However, it is advisable not to file a belated appeal because it comes with its own hassles. All right. Form 36 is generally the form which needs to be filled for filing of an appeal before the IT18. Form 36A is where you are filing an appeal against the DRP directions after the final order. The Form 36 should contain grounds of appeal. Statement of facts really is not required over here because the CIT appeals is the order which is impugned, and Form 35 is already a part of your Form 36, and therefore no repetition is required. Pre-deposit tax is something which the CIT already deals, so no question of pre-deposit tax over here, except if Yomesh has something to add upon. Requisite fees need to be paid. They may range as far as issue wise is concerned. Generally, the fees is about 10,000, but at times when there is a loss, there is a lesser fee also. Right. For revenue to file an appeal, there is a tax effect limitation prescribed by CBDT now, as far as the circular number 3 of 2019 is concerned. It is enhanced to 50 lakhs. It was earlier 20 lakhs. I happen to be a party to a particular matter in the case of ECI Telecom. What had happened in that matter was there was a transfer pricing addition. The CIT appeal had given us relief, and the revenue had challenged the appeal, challenged the order in appeal before the IT18. In the meanwhile, before the hearing came up before the tribunal, this particular circular came in. We took the reliance of this circular and stated that the revenue appeal should be withdrawn basis this particular circular. Of course, adherence of rules set out in Income Tax Appellate Tribunal Rules 1963 is a must. As stated, grounds should be to the point and not narrative. General grounds, specific grounds, alternative or without prejudice crimes. We will deal with such grounds one by one. Right. Before dealing with such grounds, additional grounds. It's a prevalent practice before the IT18. Admission of additional grounds must be by accompanying of an application and affidavit. Generally, such additional grounds are filed to challenge the jurisdiction of the assessing officer or non-application of a judgment. I happen to argue a particular matter before the tribunal in the case of Viacom 18. Now, a little bit of history over here as far as the issue and the history of the matter is concerned. Viacom 18 had a negative decisions for their earlier years as far as the payment of transponder fees to a non-resident entity is concerned. The assessing officer was saying that the TDS should have been deducted. The plea of the assessee was that the TDS withholding was not the requirement. The Mumbai tribunal in one of the earlier years had relied upon the then Verizon decision, which was prevalent of the Madras High Court, stating that yes, TDS should have been deducted on payment of transponder fees, and therefore the matter was decided against the assessee. When I got these matters for a particular transaction, these were 16 matters wherein we strategized to file an additional ground, wherein nobody had seen in the earlier orders that the recipient of this particular payment was in itself not exigible to tax in India, and therefore we filed an application for admission of ground of appeal to take and rely on the decision of GE Technology of the Supreme Court, which says that where the recipient is not taxable in India, there is no liability on the payer to deduct tax. And in spite of negative decisions in Assis's own case, the bench had to take cognizance of this Supreme Court decision in the case of GE, and the appeal was allowed on the basis of this additional ground. The second case which I was involved was in the case of Oracle Financial Software Services. Here, interesting facts were that this assessing officer had never issued 143(2) notice in pursuant to the reassessment proceedings. The AY was 4.5. In fact, what had happened was there was a reassessment proceedings on 4.5 on A to C issues. There was a second reassessment proceeding for the same year on A plus C and D issue. After almost 8 years, after the CIT appeals order, and this matter had gotten heard multiple times, released multiple times, we happened to come across that although there's a mention of issuance of notice under section 143(2) is in the assessment order, there's actually no issuance of notice. Therefore, we sought to raise this additional ground that no non-issuance of notice under section 143(2) in reassessment proceedings goes to the root of the matter, and therefore there is no jurisdiction for the assessing officer to carry out the reassessment proceedings, and thus they become void in ab initio. At the time of the hearing, the revenue vehemently argued and submitted its written submission as to why such admission of additional ground should not be entertained, because it was belated after 8 years. We were filing this additional ground on the basis of Hotel Blue Moon Supreme Court decision, although it was in the context of 158 BC. However, there were cases of the Bombay High Court in other cases such as Salman Khan, Geno Pharmaceuticals, which were directly on the point that non-issuance of the notice under section 143(2) directly hit the jurisdictional point as far as the AO's jurisdiction is concerned, and treated the entire reassessment as void ab initio. In fact, when the matter was concluded, we had the benefit of the Supreme Court decision in the case of Lakshman Das Khandelwalji also. Right, Vyomesh, would you like to add upon this?
Yeah.
As far as additional ground is concerned?
Yeah. Are we covering 36A separately?
No.
Okay. So just wanted to touch upon one additional aspect when we were discussing the earlier slide on Form 36 and 36A also. Right? There might be a situation where there is a CIT appeal order which is partly in your favor and partly against you. As in, suppose there were 5 grounds. Out of the 5 grounds, 4 grounds are in your favor and 1 ground is not in your favor. So considering that you have covered majority of the grounds in your favor, you decide not to go for appeal before the ITAT, right? However, the department decides to go to appeal against the 4 grounds which are in your favor. So the department files the appeal against the favorable order passed by the CIT appeal. Now here you have an option to file a cross objection for that 1 ground which you felt that I don't want to litigate and I don't want to go to the tribunal. Now that any which ways you are going to the tribunal for the department appeal, you now have an option to file Form 36A, which is there in this first bullet, that is called as cross objection, again, which is emanating from the same CIT appeal order. And this cross objection has to be filed within a period of 30 days from receipt of the Form 36.
CIT appeal order.
Not CIT appeal order.
Form 36. No,
Form
36.
Yeah, Form 36. So you can file this Form 36A. So this is an additional window available to you in cases where initially you opt not to go for the tribunal appeal, but since department is going, you have this additional right to file cross objections also. This is an option available to you. Not necessary that you have to always file Form 36A, but depending on the facts of the case, this is how you can proceed in terms of cross objections also. So I just wanted to touch upon this additional aspect of cross objection. Secondly, coming to the additional grounds, there might be a possibility.
I would like to touch upon a cross objection actually.
Yes, please.
There might be a situation that you have raised an additional ground challenging the very jurisdiction before the CIT appeals. Now, CIT appeals has only given has rendered the decision in favor of the SSE by only taking into consideration the jurisdiction aspect. He has not at all decided on merits. In this case, the revenue would challenge the jurisdiction part. As Yomesh is rightly pointing out, by way of a cross objection, you may also challenge the merits because merits were never looked into by the commissioner, and therefore it gives you a window to not only defend your case as far as the jurisdiction is concerned, but also argue on merits with regard to the cross objection, which you have the window when Form 36 is served upon. Yes, Yomesh.
Yeah. So cross objection and cross appeals, these are two different terms. You might come across different wordings or different terms. Cross appeals and cross objection. Cross appeal is something where at the very outset you decide for this one ground, you also will file an appeal before the ITAT, and you actually file an appeal before ITAT. So you file Form 36 for one ground which is against you. Department files Form 36 for the 4 grounds which are in your favor. These appeals will be called as cross appeals because you have also filed an appeal, department has also filed an appeal. This is called cross appeals. Cross objection is something different which we just discussed prior to this.
Right, shall we move
Yeah.
on?
Yeah, Abhishek.
Yeah. All right. Filing of paper book, very important. Filing of paper book before the tribunal is of utmost importance because it is what the papers which the bench would look in order to decide a particular matter one way or the other. Therefore, collation and filing of documents to substantiate the claim and filing exactly the documents which would really stand a chance for success before the tribunal should be filed. For example, filing of return of income, competition letters, basically all the documents which you have filed before the commissioner appeals, along with the written submission which was filed before the commissioner, should really form the paper book to be filed before the ITAT. Needless to say that pagination and certification is also a must, especially when an additional evidence is led before the CIT appeals. A situation may arise that before the ITAT that you have only filed A to X before AO, Y and Z documents were only filed before the CIT appeals. Therefore, while filing paper book before the ITAT, the index should contain this certification. Documents at serial number A to X were filed before the AO. Documents X to Z, Y and Z were only filed before the CIT appeals, before the authorized signatory who signs the particular paper book. Right. Written submissions. Erstwhile, the practice of written preparation and filing of written submissions were not there, but due to the moving times and the pendency of the matters, is that generally a matter is particularly heard on a particular date. The time limit to decide a particular matter is 90 days. If an order is not being passed within that particular time limit, the ITAT again posts the matter for a clarificatory hearing and thereafter gets themselves extended by another 90 days. Written submission, preparation and filing of written submission actually helps the bench in order to decide and write the order, and therefore in recent times we have also put into practice that written submission should necessarily be filed at the time of the hearing. Maybe it may be advanced to the bench right before the hearing, and the members may be taken through the written submission, or you may argue your matter, lay down the facts, lead the case laws, and at the conclusion, you may tender a written submission encompassing what you have just argued before the court. preparation of charts, as Yomesh was pointing out, preparation of charts is vital. Issue-wise facts should be set out. Findings of each of the authorities should be set out. It's basically a one-pager chart which should contain facts, decision of the AO, submission before the CIT appeals, decision of the CIT appeal, submission before the ITAT, and case laws in support of your arguments. This is very vital so that it gives a bird eye view to the members in order to decide the matter one way or the other as far as the facts of the matter goes. Yes, again, a separate legal paperwork is advisable to be prepared. Legal paperwork really should be filed during the course of the hearing and not at the time of filing of the paperwork. Factual paperwork may be filed within 7 days from the date of the hearing as far as the ITAT rules goes. However, it is generally advisable that legal paperwork may be tendered across the bench. The underlying principle here is that if you file it in advance, the department representative might be better equipped to distinguish the case laws which you would be relying in order to succeed before the tribunal. All right. Before moving forward, there is one thing which I would like to mention. Most of the times what happens is there are matters which are either covered in SECI's own case by their orders for the earlier years, or a similar issue has been decided by the same bench of the ITAT or coordinate benches of the ITAT on a particular point. When you have such matter which is covered, you may have an option to state at the time of the hearing that the matter is covered, and such matters may be taken out of the turn whenever they are listed for hearing. However, it is generally seen nowadays that if a particular counsel mentions a matter that is covered, the bench tends to take more pains and go into detail rather than not going to detail at all, as although the matter is covered. Hearing of the appeal. Whoever files the appeal, that is, whoever is the appellant, opens the arguments. Once the appellant lay down the facts and whatever has been taken as far as the decision goes by the AO or CIT appeals, they make their arguments. The respondent in the matter then get the chance to argue their contentions. Thereafter, the bench gives the chance to the appellants again to rebut and refute the points in its rejoinder in response to the arguments set forth by the respondents. The respondents further gets a chance to rebut the points which were stated by the appellants in the rejoinder by way of a surrejoinder. And thereafter, the matters are taken heard. Yomesh, would you like to add anything? Because I have certain cases which I would like to discuss.
Yeah, so just few basic things that remember while filing a paper book, that tribunal is the final fact-finding authority. You cannot appeal for any factual ground before the High Court. High Court will only take up the question of law. So if you have anything to submit in terms of factual documents or factual submissions, tribunal is the last resort available to you. Once you cross the ladder of tribunal, before the High Court, you cannot bring out any new facts. That is very, very important point to be considered. So therefore, you have to file the paper book considering this aspect, that this is the final fact-finding authority, and you should cover all the factual aspects which are required or relevant for the grounds of appeal. First, and second, just to give you a brief background about how tribunal works, I'm sure, or rather, for those who have not appeared or those who have not seen the tribunal, tribunal is heard by two members. One member is a judicial member, another member is an accountant member. So we have member from judicial side as well, and we have member from the accountant side as well. Both these together form a bench and hear the matter, where the matter is heard in a courtroom. It is as good as a court, not exactly a high court, but it is as good as a courtroom, and it is in fact a courtroom, which follows all the civil laws, civil code of conduct, etc. And while representing before the ITAT, one important aspect is the dress code, which is that you have to be in your blazer, ties, etc. Otherwise, the members will not hear you. So these are a few minor aspects which I just thought that is relevant for the ITAT to be considered for those who have not been to ITAT.
Very relevant point, Yomesh. Thank you for touching upon those points. As a regular practitioner, such points never come across my mind, and thank you so much for touching upon those points. Really, these points, as a practitioner, we generally tend to take for granted, really. Moving upon. If the issues are complex, then the bench tends to generally reserve the orders. This is the general practice. If the issues are simple, then the bench pronounces its view in the open court after the hearing is concluded. However, the orders are still reserved. The orders are passed and delivered on a later date. After or during the time of the hearing, if the bench feels, the bench may direct to file any submissions or documents in connection of the matter. Such submission should directly be addressed to the registry of the tribunal with a copy to the respondents. I have listed down some different kinds of appeals, rather petitions, which generally takes place before the tribunal. There are stay petitions. It's a separate appeal, separate application for asking for a stay, and which are generally listed on a particular Friday. There was a particular case in the case of Proteus Engineering where there were certain matters for AY 910 to 1415 wherein a transfer pricing issue was involved. The issue was whether a foreign associate enterprise can be taken as a tested party for benchmarking and exercising the coming to the exercise of arm's length principle and price. The assessing officer, although for this particular year, which were heard thrice, released thrice by the tribunal, went after the assessee for the recovery for 1314 and 1415. The tribunal stated that the assessee and its counsel has taken all the pains in order to get the matter disposed, but for some way or the other, the matter has not been disposed. It's been languishing for so many days, and therefore any kind of delay was not attributable, or any kind of action which was not attributable to take away the stay which was already granted, and therefore a stay was extended beyond 365 days by the tribunal in this particular matter. There are certain matters where a particular issue is either settled or it's so nominal that a particular matter can be given an early hearing. It's a discretionary power which is vested with the benches and with the members. In BBH Communications, what had happened was the CIT appeals had just dismissed the appeal in limine because there were some discrepancies which had cropped up in Form 35. A Form 35 which was electronically filed was not appropriately signed by the authorized representative, and there was certain mistake which was cropping up on the side of that particular when the document was uploaded. An appeal was preferred by the assessee before the tribunal with an early hearing application stating asking for a remand to the file of the commissioner so that the commissioner really decides the issue on merits. The early hearing matter was listed on a particular Friday. Normally what happens is that an application for early hearing is filed. The members take cognizance of that particular early hearing application. The council has to state reasons as to why an early hearing application is sought, and thereafter a particular appeal hearing is fixed out of its turn on a particular date. However, what happened in this BBH Communications case is that when we appeared before the tribunal in the earlier case, the tribunal took a view that when there is no decision of the CIT appeals on merits, it sought fit to remand the matter there and there itself by taking the actual appeal along with the early hearing application to be heard and rendered the order accordingly. Right. As I earlier covered, technical and clarification hearings are listed when the matter is heard and 90 days are or about to get over, and such technical or clarification hearings are generally listed on a particular Friday. MAs for curing mistake apparent from record. Earlier the time limit was 4 years. Now the time limit is 6 months. In the case of Crompton Greaves, an MA was filed challenging the ITAT order, which was passed beyond 90 days. The MA was allowed, stating that no order which can be passed beyond 90 days, because that is the stipulated time wherein the ITT order has to be passed. One more MA was allowed. One more other MA was dismissed in the case of Selectronics. It was a revenue MA. The MA was filed in which was essentially seeking a review of the order. Now, a scope of MA is very restricted, as you all know. It is only for curing the defect which is apparent from record, mistake apparent from record. It cannot be a review, and therefore rightly the tribunal dismissed revenues MA. We have already discussed about Proteus Engineering. We shall move on. Right, single member cases. Single member bench is formed to decide matters where the total income of assessee is below 50 lakhs. It is enshrined in section 255(2) of the Act. Third member cases. A matter is referred to a third member where a judicial member and an accountant member of the same bench who has heard the matter form from two different views and pass to different orders. When such orders are passed, a third member is referred to put such controversy to rest. Special bench. A matter may be referred to special bench having 3 or more members to resolve a conflict between two contrary decisions of ITAT bench, of the same ITAT bench, or concurrent basis or concurrent benches. One decision comes to mind, Reliance Communication, which was decided by Honorable Member R.C. Sharma, wherein Senior Counsel J.D. Mistry had appeared. This is the matter which actually sets out how a particular special bench is formed. This was a appeal wherein application was made by the revenue for formation of special bench. The ITAT decided that the special bench cannot be formed at the behest of an application of either of the parties. It is a power vested with the members. If the members feel and deem fit to do so, then only they may constitute a special bench. There are certain matters which are remanded by the High Court to the file of the ITAT to decide certain matters. Generally, the time limit prescribed for such disposals is 6 months, and therefore it tends to take precedence over the general and sundry matters. Right. Vyomesh, would you like to add anything before I move on to the High Court?
Just to summarize on the tribunal matters, miscellaneous application is nothing but, if you can just go on to the MA slide, miscellaneous application is nothing but it is basically to challenge an order which is more of which is a mistake. Basically, the mistake can be of the facts, or it can be of a law. Particularly, suppose they have not followed any jurisdictional judgment, or they have not followed any high court, etc. That can be a matter of MA, or some facts have been misplaced in the particular order, so that can be a ground for miscellaneous application. Then another matter which is here, the 90 days criteria, Crompton Greaves, and the technical or clarification hearing. So basically what happens is where matter is heard and the order is not passed within 90 days, then the norm or the practice is that the tribunal should recall the matter and there should be a re-hearing before passing the final order. Right, Abhishek?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, so after 90 days, the matter should be heard again by the bench, and only then the order can be passed. So the 90 days is it is a technical, I would say, timeline that if within 90 days the order is not passed, you should not consider that matter is heard. That matter will be reheard again. That is one important aspect to be considered. Stay petition is, as you are aware, that generally the stay, once you cross the CIT appeal and the department does not grant you the stay, so you have an option to file a stay petition, which is a separate petition before the ITAT, and ITAT can grant you a stay at their discretion. And now with the amendment with the Finance Act recently, the stay cannot go beyond 365 days. Prior to this amendment, there have been cases where stay could go beyond 365 days also, depending on the facts of the case, etc. But now the stay petition cannot be, or rather stay cannot be granted beyond 365 days. That is one point regarding stay petition. And one important aspect regarding stay is that once you file the stay petition and once you have been granted the stay, your matter will automatically be heard on a fast track basis. So you should be mindful of this fact that once your stay application is accepted, your matter will come up before the tribunal at the earliest, and then getting an adjournment before the tribunal will also be practically very, very difficult, because you have already been granted the stay. So in stay granted matters, the members are very, very reluctant to give you any adjournment. So therefore you should plan your affairs, you should brief your counsels, or if you yourself are appearing before the tribunal, you should be ready with the matter, assuming that the matter can come up as early as maybe a couple of weeks time or maybe a month's time. So that is an important aspect for stay granted. So effectively you might have seen in the cause list, if you have gone through the cause list, SGEH, which means stay granted early hearing. So all these are the technical terms which are there on the I would say cause list also. EH means
Early hearing.
hearing, SG means stay granted, OM means old matter. So all these are the brief connotations given to the judge, to the courts, to the relevant appeal, so that the members can decide, or members can get an idea that what kind of appeal is this and what priority should be given, even for giving any adjournment, etc. So these are a few practical aspects which I thought that I should touch upon.
Yes, yes.
Abhishek, over to you.
Yeah, as Vyomesh has rightly said, that there's an amendment that no stay can be extended beyond 365 days, and that is the reason I have actually listed this Proteus Engineering case. In this case, they have extended the stay beyond 365 days only on the point that because the matter was heard thrice and released thrice, no delay in disposing the matters can be attributable to the assessee, and therefore the stay was extended by exercising their discretionary powers. Incidentally, the revenue has filed the appeal against such order of the stay granting stay beyond 365 days before the High Court. The matters are yet to come up. Let's see what happens. Although there is the jurisdictional Bombay Accord in the case of Tata, which says that in such exceptional circumstances, stay can be extended beyond 365 days. Just touching upon brief connotation on adjournments. Yes, adjournments should not be taken lightly before the tribunal. granting of an adjournment also is a discretionary power vested with the bench. It is not a matter of right to ask an adjournment. The bench may grant initial couple of adjournments on some cases or the other, but due to the pendency of cases, the benches are also under extreme pressure to dispose matters one way or the other, and therefore seeking adjournments on any or sundry accounts should be avoidable, to say the least. As Vyomesh rightly mentioned, adjournments in stay granted matters should absolutely be avoided unless there is some kind of extreme emergency which crops in. The bench are vested with the power to levy costs if at all a frivolous plea is made for an adjournment. So exercising adjournment should be really be done cautiously. All right, let's move on to representation before Honorable High Court. Now, High Court is a very peculiar institution. Only advocates by virtue of Advocates Act and the respective High Court rules can appear and represent the matter. In order to file, or for that matter, in order to represent in an appeal filed by the revenue, an appointment of an advocate on record is a must. Advocate on record is an practicing advocate who is registered with that particular High Court, and all the filings which are to be carried out through his offices. Just for our benefit, for matters arising out of Income Tax Act, as far as Bombay High Court is concerned, original side rules are applicable. Generally, there are three kinds of hearings in appeals and writs: notice hearing, admission hearing, and final hearing. Notice hearing is prevalent in other high courts. Notice hearing is not a practice which is adopted in the Bombay High Court. Bombay High Court only has an admission hearing and a final hearing as far as appeals and writs are concerned. Very important, caveat application can be filed in a high court. However, this practice is prevalent in other courts other than the courts which were set up through presidency, that is Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta do not have the caveat system. Appeals under 260A only on question of law. Such questions are to be suggestively drafted in the memo of appeal. The High Court has the discretionary power to modify such questions or reframe any questions as their lordships may deem fit. The time limit is an appeal should be filed within 120 days from the date of the order which is to be impugned, that is the order of ITAT. Belated appeal can be entertained by High Court on a separate application, but generally it is subject to costs. When an appeal is to be drafted, all the orders, letters, and submissions should form a part of an appeal, especially an assessee appeal, because the endeavor should be either for an admission of an appeal or a remand to the tribunal for certain facts which were not considered by the tribunal in their own decision. Right, assessee's appeal. At admission stage, the endeavor of the counsel should be to convince the lordships to admit the matter by arguing that a substantial question of law arises from the impugned ITAT order, and the matter is then kept for final hearing. However, if facts permit, the counsel should also demonstrate and justify that there were jurisdictional lacunas or there was some perversity which cropped in the order of the tribunal, and a remand also may be sought to the tribunal so that the tribunal may reconsider the matter afresh. As far as assessee appeal is concerned, if an assessee loses an appeal before the tribunal, then it is a long battle, because an assessee appeal, if at all, if there is a question of law, a substantial question of law coming out of such impugned order, then the appeal is admitted and the matter is kept for final hearing. Now, it is upon courts and in their practice as to when the final hearing comes up. It is a matter of the registry to really list the final hearing matters. The High Court generally admits appeals on question of law if it is pointed out that a similar, if not an identical question of law was admitted in either assessee's own case or any other. If it's a revenue appeal, the endeavor at the admission stage should be that the council should be able to convince the lordships to dismiss the appeal at the admission stage itself and not to admit any questions. In the case of Kishan Ratilal Choksi, the issue was about mark-to-market losses. The revenue was in appeal against a favorable ITAT order for the SSE. The High Court had already dismissed revenue appeals on an identical issue for earlier years. When the matter came up for hearing, Mr. Pinto, the Revenue Council, vehemently sought for the admission of this particular appeal, stating that a substantial question of law gives rise out of this particular impugned order. When the bench of the High Court put the question to the Assessee Council, the Assessee Council simply said that the case is already covered by the assessee's own case by the High Court, wherein the High Court has dismissed the revenue appeal in the prior years. Having considered that fact, the High Court exercised their discretionary powers and levied a cost of 1 lakh rupees to be paid to the assessee within 4 weeks. Immediately the following day, the revenue moved an application for expunging such reprimanding order for costs. Although the matter was dismissed with the agreement of the Assessee Council, the costs were expunged. Right. Revenue appeal tax limit is about 1 crore. Now, this is very important. Generally, the appeal filed by the revenue is not served upon by the AO on the assessee. The assessee generally comes to notice of the particular matter if at all the assessee approaches or their consultant or chartered accountants approach the AO if any matter is taken up in appeal against the favorable ITAT order. Since the practice of caveat is not prevalent in Bombay High Court, the practical approach is to approach a practicing advocate or a CA for advice. An assessee may keep an eagle's eye on Bombay High Court website to see whether there is an appeal filed by the revenue. However, the task is cumbersome and it should really be left with the lawyers or advocates who are practicing in high courts on a daily basis. AR's approach also should be to obtain a copy from the AO if at all an appeal is preferred before the High Court. Right. Writs can also be filed before the High Court. Writ jurisdiction of the High Court can be called upon to entertain a petition under Article 226 or 227 of the Constitution to issue a writ or a writ in the nature of mandamus, certiorari, quo warranto or prohibition. There's a fifth kind of writ, that is habeas corpus, but it does not generally come into play as far as the income tax practice is concerned. Writ petitions can be challenged, can be filed to challenge the jurisdiction of the AO, non-action or perverse action by the AO on following counts: issuance of notice under Section 148 and order disposing the objections thereof. an influx can be seen in the High Court, particularly in the month of December or March, when there are time limits which are getting exhausted. Writ against issuance of notice under section 263. Writ for stay of demand. This is especially seen in the month of March. Writ against non-issuance of refund due to the assessee. Writ against non-issue of interest on refund under section 244A or 241A, as the case may be. Dismissal of MA, right? If a particular assessee has filed an MA against an ITT order, in addition to an appeal against that particular order, an MA comes to be dismissed by the bench, there is no appeal provision against an MA. Only a writ lies against an MA order, and therefore a writ may be filed against MA, but it is not advisable, because generally the mindset of the lordships is that if you have already come in an appeal before the High Court in an impugned matter, then you have already exhausted your alternate remedy. Lastly, a writ can be filed for quashing of garnishing notices which are issued under section 220 subsection 6 of the Act for attachment of some bank accounts. This is also something which happens in March. Right, Yomesh, do you want to touch upon anything?
Yeah, just one thing here, connecting yesterday's session by Mr. Gandhi and today Mr. Tilak. So we are in a revolutionary stage. We heard Gandhi yesterday and we are hearing Mr. Tilak today. So yesterday we discussed about 148 reassessments, and we also discussed about various grounds, technical grounds on change of opinion, reason to
Right.
believe, etc. Where we believe that a reassessment has been initiated, and if you have a strong belief or if you have a strong ground that the matter is strongly in your favor, then it is advised, and if the quantum is high, of course, then it is advisable that you can directly file a writ petition rather than having a normal course of appeal. Because generally what happens is, once 148 is initiated, practically 90 to 95% of the cases the order is going to be against you. So once the order is going to be against you, the only option left for you is to go through the normal route, that is CIT appeal, ITAT, and then High Court. So therefore, it is important for you that once you get the order disposing the objections, as we discussed yesterday, and if you see merit in the case, and if you believe that the quantum involved is high, and you don't want to continue the litigations for years together, it is always advisable to go for 148, to go for writ petition against that 148. The benefit of that is that generally you will be granted either an ad interim stay right away, or you will also be granted interim stay. So that proceeding will be stopped then and there, and whenever your matter is heard on merit, it may be say within a year, 2 year, depending on the load upon the court. But generally, if you have merit in the case, you will be granted the interim relief or an interim relief, as the case may be. So interim relief is nothing but the department cannot proceed further to pass an order, and the department with the proceedings by the department will be stayed by the court. It is nothing but a stay on the 148 proceedings.
Vyomesh, are you still speaking? Hello? Right.
Hello.
I thought Vyomesh was still speaking, so I'll continue.
I guess there is some issue at Vyomesh. You should please
Vyomesh.
continue, Abhishek ji.
Yeah. Sure. So as Vyomesh rightly said, the writs are heard in two parts. There's an admission hearing, generally, where they grant an ad interim relief, that is nothing but a stay on the enumerated notices. Thereafter, if there is a merit in the writ petition, then the court may render a decision quashing the entire proceedings or the notice which is challenged by way of these writs. Moving on, representation before the Supreme Court. There is no statutory appeal provided by the Act. Therefore, it's a very restricted scope. Strict requirement of advocate on record registered with the Supreme Court to be appointed, and all such filings are to be carried through their offices. Appeal may be a special leave petition may be preferred under the Article 136 of the Constitution. If their lordships feel that a substantial question is arising out of an impugned order of HC, then notice is issued to the respondents and the SLP is thereafter converted into a civil appeal. All the provisions of Code of Civil Procedure Code of 1908 are made applicable. Right. You must be wondering what is a term which I have been using for the last 20 odd minutes, that is caveat. The expression caveat comes from the principle called as caveat emptor, that is, let the person be aware. What does it do is that it prevents a particular forum to proceed in deciding a matter without giving any notice to the respondent. So a practice of caveat application is prevalent in Supreme Court. It is advisable to file a caveat, especially in relation to the favorable order rendered by the High Court in the Supreme Court. If there is an apprehension that a revenue may challenge by way of an SLP against a favorable High Court decision, a caveat should be filed by the SSE in the Supreme Court so that the counsels of the SSE, as a matter of right, may be heard at the time of the notice hearing itself. Because the practice in the Supreme Court is that in the notice hearing, generally the respondents are not called upon to argue their matters as a matter of right. Only and only if the Supreme Court deems fit that an SLP is to be converted into a civil appeal, as there is a question of law which deserves to be entertained. Thereafter, they admit the SLP, issue the notice, and thereafter the SLP is converted into civil appeal. There is no time limit defined in Income Tax Act. Generally, the time limit as far as SLP is concerned, we have to look into the Limitation Act, and 90 days is something which has been prescribed for an SLP under Article 136 of the Constitution. As far as the Circular 3 of 2019 is concerned, the tax effect limit for revenue SLP is about 2 crores. Assessee SLP should contain all orders, judgment referred by the High Court. Drafting of SLP is an art in itself, and therefore it should be entrusted with somebody who has been practicing in the Supreme Court for some time, because the format is completely different from what we generally use in the High Courts. Application for stay of an operation of the High Court order may also be filed in along with the special leave petition. It is very important, because what happens is if at all an assessee loses in the final hearing before the High Court, then the order of the AO has attained finality. The AO may proceed to recover money by various sorts which are prescribed in the Act. Therefore, operation of such order is very important. Of course, there is a writ jurisdiction under Article 32 of the Constitution. However, the scope of such writs are restricted to the violation of fundamental rights only, which generally do not crop in as far as the practice of income tax goes. Right. Before concluding, I would like to discuss one particular case in decision in the case of HG Asia Holdings. HG Asia Holdings is a peculiar case. What had happened was, I'll give you a brief background. The issue is with regard to Instruction 3 of 2003, which states that if the international transactions in a particular year exceed 5 crores, then AO has to refer the matter particularly to a TPO for its transfer pricing order. In this case, that was not done. An additional ground was filed before the CIT appeals. CIT appeals took a different view and passed the order against the assessee. The assessee thereafter filed the matter before the ITAT. ITAT, without going to the merits of the matter, decided on this additional ground of jurisdictional issue and decided that yes, the TPO should have been referred wherein the international transactions exceeded 5 crores. The revenue thereafter filed an appeal against the ITT order. The revenue appeal came to be dismissed at the admission stage, wherein the ITT order was affirmed by the High Court, stating that when there is an instruction which is binding upon the officers of the department, then such instruction should have been followed. And since the instruction has not been followed, the entire addition which were made by the assessing officer in the assessment order was quashed by the High Court. The revenue sought to file an SLP against the Bombay High Court decision. The notice, the SLP was admitted and the notice was issued to the assessee. At the time of the hearing, we stated that since it's mandatory that a reference was to be made to the TPO, it was not done so, and therefore there is no need for the Supreme Court to entertain the civil appeal. The Supreme Court held that a reference to the TPO is mandatory as per the Instruction 3 of 2003. However, since there is a procedural lacuna, the matter was again restored to the file of the AO to carry out this exercise afresh. So it was really a double whammy for the assessee. Although interesting facts cropped up, the SLP, when it was filed sometime in the month of May 2018, had tax effect which was less than 2 crores. The notice 2019, not 18, 2019. The notice hearing was concluded in May 2019. The admission hearing was listed on 5th of August 2019, and the orders were reserved. Incidentally, the circular number 3 of 2019 enhancing the limit from 1 crore to 2 crores was passed on 8th of August 2019. The order, although upholding that the reference was to be made to the TPO, in effect remanding the matter to the file of the AO, was passed by the Supreme Court on 13th of August. We filed a review petition stating that when the order was only heard and not passed, the Supreme Court should have really took cognizance of this particular notification. However, it also came to be dismissed. With this, I give to Vyomesh if he has to add, or any questions if at all there are there, I am happy to address.
Yeah, I'm good to go. I think I have covered whatever I wanted to, or what I have added whatever I wanted to. So nothing from my side. If you have any questions apart from what have already been answered on the chat box. This Mayur, over to you.
Okay, sir. Questions are not there.
I think there were a few questions which I have already answered on the chat box. Apart from that, are there any questions we shall be happy to take up?
Yeah, we still have time. That's why.
Yeah, we have time. If you have any questions, we shall be happy to take up.
One of the question was what books to refer or for the procedure and all. Maybe.
What? Sorry?
What books or any study material to refer the procedure for ITAT and CIT appeal? Any books you suggest? That was one of the questions, I guess.
Okay. So there is a book on ITT procedure, which you may find in the ITT library. It's a book wherein all the frequently answered questions have frequently raised questions have been answered in that particular. I am forgetting the name. Maybe I'll give the name to Vyomesh. Vyomesh may be able to circulate within the branch. But yes, there is a procedural book one may refer to. Apart from, of course, the income tax appellate tribunal rules of 1963, which really need to be adhered when one is representing or thinking of representing a matter before the ITAT.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Any more questions?
In terms of books to be referred, I would obviously we will suggest you some books which are available. But if you ask me personally, then it is more of learning on ground rather than reading the book. And because it is, as I said, it is more about the tactical approach and the practical approach. Be it CIT appeal or be it ITAT, what is more relevant is the more you are on the ground. See, what you can do is rather than referring to a book, you can accompany anybody who is referring or who is basically appearing before CIT appeal or ITAT, as the case may be. See, ITAT is an open court. If you have time, you can just go there and sit there. That is an open book. You just go there and observe how the people are arguing the matter, and you will learn obviously on the ground. And as far as ITAT is concerned, I would suggest that there are only handful of advocates and chartered accountants who represent before the ITAT, and that is why I said that there is a lot of opportunities available in terms of even CIT appeal and ITAT to represent before there. And mind you, once you appeal ITAT, the fees that you earn or the fees that you will be getting will be much better than the compliance fees that you charge to your clients for return filing, etc. And another aspect is we also conduct mock tribunals. We at WRC level and also at non-WRC level, we conduct mock tribunals wherein we actually demonstrate how a tribunal works, and we invite the tribunal members, we invite the tribunal judges and the judges. It is as real as a courtroom. It is as real as a courtroom, and you can see how the tribunal operates, how the tribunal functions. It is I would say a real life experience of tribunal that we conduct every year. We have our own mock tribunal group that we conduct these exercises just to educate the members. How does the tribunal function? How does the tribunal work? There is one question from Sandesh Oswal. What is the difference between question of law and question of fact? So just to answer your question, Shailesh, in a simplistic manner, whether a particular disallowance can be made under Section 37 or not, that is a question of law. And whether Mayur, if you can just mute yourself, I think there is some disturbance. And whether the disallowance is proper based on the submissions made. So if the disallowance can be either for non-submission of documents, that is a factual disallowance. If the disallowance is on interpretation of section, etc., it is a question of law. So this is the difference between question of law and question of fact. Question of law more deals with interpretation of the law, and question of fact is more about the factual aspects.
Correct. So I would like to just add two things on that. As Vyomesh rightly said, the question of fact is really something which is arising out of the facts which are led or facts which are either properly not appreciated before a forum. For example, I can the fastest example which can come to my mind is nowadays what happens is since the ITAT is the final fact finding authority as far as the transfer pricing issues are concerned with regard to inclusion or exclusion of comparables, the High Court, although the revenue take up these appeals against a favorable ITAT order before the High Court, the High Court has dismissed revenue appeals stating that inclusion or exclusion of a particular comparable is a question of fact and not a question of law, and therefore there one needs to keep that difference in mind while actually coming to a conclusion what is a question of fact and what is a question of law. Right. Mr. Pratik Doshi has also asked a question whether we have to submit entire case law to the ITAT. Yes, Pratik, it is always beneficial to submit the entire case law to the bench members. In fact, it is really shocking to see that most of the websites which they report such case laws, there are quite a bit fallacies and lacunas in their reporting. Therefore, one should really, if at all submitting case laws to the commissioner, be it commissioner, ITAT, High Court or Supreme Court, one should really have the endeavor to have the case laws out of the reporting books, that is ITR, ITD, SOT, TTJ and the like, or the licensed websites such as Manupatra, Taxman, SCC Online, and so on and so forth. But filing of the entirety of the case law is a must.
In fact, practically speaking, recently the tribunals have started taking judgments of taxmen. Earlier, they always used to prefer the ITR copies or the ITD copies, as the case may be.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, Mayur, over to you. I think we don't have any further questions.
Okay. Abhishek sir, I thank you very much on behalf of the participants and on behalf of Kalyan Dumil branch for taking the session. Today's session was very much informative. As Vyomesh bhai said in the beginning, and you also seconded that we should not focus only on the traditional practice. This is the avenue which the professional should have. We can always appear before CIT appeal and ITAT, and also the work, the satisfaction of work is much different from the compliance work which we are doing today. So I am sure that the members and the participants would have been benefited by your guidance and your knowledgeable. You have answered the queries also very well. So I thank you. Hello.
Yeah, Mayur.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much once again. Thanks a lot. I request the members that tomorrow we have session by Vyomesh bhai on the international tax series. On the 3rd, we have the session for payment chartered accountants. And on the 4th, we have session for the stock, how to build your wealth through stock market during the lockdown. The timing are changed from 4 to 6 because of the speakers availability. So the link will be shared with you via WhatsApp group and also the link will be shared on the CPE portal also. So if the members are there, I would request them to join and avail the benefit. Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks once again, and thank you, Umesh bhai, for again arranging the session for us and helping us to conduct the direct tax series and international tax series very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayur. Thank you, Vyomesh, for having me for this session, and happy learning to everybody.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I close this meeting now.
Yes.